Another Crab's Treasure is Dark Bob's Souls Pants. It's our entry into the Souls-like genre that attempts to take a genre that's been typically very serious, grimdark, and I guess edgy, and inject some color into it, just some lightheartedness, right? We are taking an approach to the genre the way Nintendo might, in our heads at least. Hi, I'm Nick Caelan. I'm the studio head and art director of Another Crab's Treasure.
And I'm Caelan. I'm the co-founder of Aggro Crab, and I'm the creative director.
We've made this game where you're a hermit crab and your shell has been stolen from you. And in order to get it back, you have to cross the whole ocean filled with all these different kinds of monsters. And in order to defend yourself from these sea creatures, well, you have to wear trash on your butt instead of a shell.
Make no mistake, the world of Another Crab's Treasure is still quite dark. Like, the game goes to some pretty dark places. It is, like, at the end of the day, a world and a narrative based off of climate catastrophe, right? We didn't just want to stay away from absolutely everything that makes Dark Souls because, like, that element of being this, like, helpless kind of guy in this very dangerous world and being a part of this world that is like sort of fragmenting and falling to pieces. We still wanted to capture that and like bring new people into that genre and just like that narrative genre as well as like the gameplay genre. So it really is a combination of the two things. When we talk about like the inspiration, we're always looking at like what about a narrative can mesh well with the gameplay we want to see.
And then on top of that, when you look at our aesthetic and how that contributes to that theme of the game, being this really cute, kind of innocent, helpless character that has to face the realities of this world kind of contributes to that.
Games that I am really inspired by when it comes to like writing and narrative style include like the Mario RPGs, for example. And those games go to some dark places, like for a Mario game at least, right? I'm just generally of the opinion that like the sense of humor is something that allows people to let their guard down a bit and let either like social commentary or just like a darker kind of emotional catharsis. They tend to let it in better, I think, when you've softened them up instead of when you're presenting people with this like, hey, this is going to be a dark game that's going to let you feel things, you're going to cry. Like, a game has big boots to fill when you present it that way.
Kid, I don't have time to argue political nuances here. I've got a lot of tax evaders to get to.
And I also think that like what gets undersold about Dark Souls is how funny it is. Like, there's a lot more jokes in our game than there are in Dark Souls, but like Dark Souls, the designers of Dark Souls absolutely understand the inherent comedy in the gameplay. Like, there's a lot of really intentionally placed slapstick and sometimes even intentionally placed comedic dialogue, It's by no means like this completely doom and gloom, like struggling atmosphere. There is like lightheartedness in it. And I think it's all the funnier for it that is like that juxtaposition that they go with. So I think the ratios are different in our game as opposed to like what From Software is putting out. But I still think that's like a mixture of humor and like dark intensity is very much at the core of what makes like Dark Souls fun.
If you just look at what our game's about, right? Like, of course it's going to be funny. You're crabs fighting other crabs. Like, there was no way we weren't going to make this a funny game. And then by giving each crab like a funny piece of trash that it has to fight with, like the first boss who fights with the straw and lid of a boba drink, using that as a lance. Like, that's just funny. That's kind of like our brand DNA or our studio DNA is that we like being funny and we want to inject that into not just the writing, but every part of the game. It's just enjoyable for us.
You can't run the law forever, kid.
It's a hard genre to pin down, but ultimately, it comes back to specific gameplay mechanics like that, right? Mm-hmm. And like different people are going to argue different things. Like, I think some people would say, maybe our level up system like isn't exactly the same as Dark Souls, so like this sort of disqualifies it from being a Souls-like. I'm sure there's like debates to be had. Ultimately, we had to pick and choose like which elements of Dark Souls were like really important to maintain the spirit of that sort of gameplay, but we did want to like tone some of them back that are like famously inaccessible, right? So if certain elements of the UI, for example, and like we wanted to reduce the amount that you need to like run back when you are killed by a boss, right? But I think people definitely should be like playing with the genre a little more and still be willing to call themselves a Souls-like. We're never going to get, you know, evolution on the genre, which is a genre we really, really love, obviously. We're never going to get that kind of like evolution if people aren't okay with stepping away from what Dark Souls is, what Elden Ring is, what this one studio has been putting out, which is like, obviously they're the source material, but that doesn't mean it's the only way to make this type of game that like people have the same sort of feelings about.
Yeah, I think the strongest ways we've kind of branched away from the hallmarks of the genre are in the storytelling method and in the art style, of course. But when you actually sit down and play the game and are in that moment-to-moment exploration and combat, it kind of feels like Dark Souls, right? Like that's still there.
Assist settings, we had a very, very similar menu in our first game in Going Under, and it's just like from the beginning we knew that was a step we wanted to take towards making the game more approachable and like bringing in new people, and we very quickly found that like a lot of people reacted to not just the accessibility options, but like the whole way in which we were approaching this game and making it not the exact same grimdark aesthetic. A lot of the reaction was like, I could never get into Elden Ring, for example, but I'd really love to try this as my first Souls-like. That's just been really, really important. We've basically disregarded any of the attitude that's like these sort of difficulty settings cheapen the experience. I think the contingent of people talking like that is much smaller than it appears. We always wanted the default difficulty of the game to be challenging and to give people experience with the genre a challenge. I think that's very important, that like there is a baseline of like the point of this game is to challenge yourself and improve your skills and get better. Like I would never want to completely eliminate that because that's just such an important part of the genre. Like, I think sometimes the conversation tends to get a little skewed in the other direction, right? Where it's like a game being difficult is in and of itself an accessibility harm. And ultimately, like, what I would like the most is for people to be drawn into this game as their first experience with the genre and understand that it is difficult and understand that they can be challenging themselves, and that's an acceptable way to play the game. But if that's not fun for someone, like, I also think they should be able to play their way. And that's really what we're going after, just giving people options.
Caelan here gave you a bunch of really compelling, altruistic, thought through reasons for why we added accessibility options to the game. But let me tell you, we also did it because we knew it would be good marketing, right? Like, you can see the headlines. First Souls-like to add accessibility menu. That could be us. And of course, that makes sense for it to be us because we're the game that looks the most inviting to the genre. We're the game that's going to have a younger audience and all that. We were kind of just thinking, if we're putting in all this work to have this feature and have that be like something we're telling people, something we're advertising, why not go all the way and let people just completely circumvent the challenge of the game if they want to? Just as a joke for TikTok, we were like, what if Krill could wear a gun as a shell, right? Like, and we did it and we thought it'd be funny. Turns out we were right. It was funny. The TikTok blew up. And then we had a second funny idea, which is what if we put it as an option for accessibility's sake? And it turns out that was also funny. We thought that would be a little more controversial because that's, kind of putting a joke in something that's supposed to be for accessibility, right? Like unheard of, right? But it turns out a lot of people in the accessibility community actually really resonated with the gun. They loved it. And I think when you look at why, it's a video game, right? It should be fun. And if you can add new fun instead of just taking away something in that menu, like, why not? Why not make it a little more exciting? So it was great. And now we have a gun that you can wear and kill everything in one hit. And some people are gonna play the game that way, and that's great. We love that.
Have you looked at our bright, colourful Souls-like game and thought, this is too happy? We need more dark and mysterious Souls-like games. There just isn't enough out there. Fear not, fellow gamer, we have added a new feature to another Crab's treasure, Dark Souls-like mode. This new feature will immediately remove all the vibrant colours in the game and replace it with a more desaturated and dark colour schemes. We also added Anor Londo.
For legal reasons, Anor Londo is definitely not in the game. How did it come about?
I don't know how it came about. I got back from like the bathroom and I saw you had pulled up the whole, like the entirety of Anor Londo.
Yeah.
And placed it into Unity.
Well, we were just thinking of an April Fool's joke. What's something we can riff off of? Oh, there's a contingency of people who are like, oh, this game isn't Dark Souls at all, blah, blah, blah. You know, you have to be this and this and this to be Dark Souls, like exactly what we just talked about, right? And just riffing off that, we were like, okay, here's a mode that you can turn on to make it more like Dark Souls. And it makes Krill depressed. It makes the environment gray and sad. It makes everything a poison swamp. And just to like take the joke all the way, we were like, all right, f*** it, Anor Londo now. So you can go to our TikTok and see Krill and Anor Londo if you want that. But unfortunately, that is not something that we can put in the game.
One of the things that people are surprised by in playtesting is how much sort of power they can gain and how much stuff there is to find outside of the critical path. You're welcome to simply get good and beat your face against a boss for as many tries as it takes to beat it. But I think for people who are more into the idea of like, okay, I've encountered this difficulty spike, let me go back and explore some areas I've previously been, and I will be able to come back stronger. I think that's very much an option in our game. And I think it's a little less, it's a lot less open world than like Elden Ring, right? It's more like these individual areas that they themselves are open world, right? But there's still plenty to explore outside of that, and I think that's a pretty core part of the game that sometimes takes people a while to pick up on, partly because I think they're not really expecting the level of content we have in the game. I think people aren't expecting like any part of like the second half of this game. Like what we have shown in advertising and what we plan on showing off before launch really doesn't scratch the surface. Like we've kept a lot in reserve. This is a weirdly ambitious game. I think it's too ambitious.
We f***ed up. We made it too big.
Yeah, we did absolutely make this game too big, but there is a lot that people haven't even seen a single bit of because we have intentionally like kept a lot of things a surprise. So I think people that the game's sort of third act, I think anyone who plays through the whole thing will be really surprised and impressed by. I think there's some really cool content there.
Oh, I just think people will be surprised by the story too. It's a story, y'all. It's got a beginning, middle, and end. It's not just secret bits of lore and environmental storytelling. There's a tale, and it's a good one. So you'll see.
I represent the Royal Duchy of Slacktide, which has recently annexed the territory surrounding and including this tide pool.
We've been talking about around the 20-hour mark. I think for someone of like moderate skill and experience level, it's always hard to put a number there when we're talking about a game that is like so skill gated, because like obviously someone who's incredible at this sort of game is going to beat it faster. Someone who needs a lot more trying is going to take much, much longer. But that's sort of our shot in the dark based on our playtests of kind of a good sort of average, which is a lot longer than I would have told you even like a year ago or a year and a half ago. Like we were under the assumption we were making like a 12 or 15 hour game, I think, until we started actually testing it and realizing how much there really was here.
What is the feeling at the studio? I'm just like anxiety. I don't know. We're tense, but excited. We all think the game is really fucking good. We're all really proud of it. But until we hit the finish line, I mean, the phrase we throw around is locked in. We gotta lock in, put our heads down, and just do what we need to do to finish wrapping up all our little bug fixes and PR stuff to get the game out the door. And then we can feel things again, you know? I need a vacation. We all need vacation.
Yeah.
And everyone's kind of got their own plan. But yeah, the studio's going to slow down while, of course, supporting the launch. And then the next game is actually already in progress. So maybe we'll see more momentum on that.
Another Crab's Treasure coming out on PC, Steam, Xbox, Game Pass for Xbox platforms and for PC, for Nintendo Switch, and for PlayStation 5.
April 25th.
April 25th.
We hope the viewers at home are happy. Subscribe to Future Games Show and buy our game, and your life will be better.